Hey everybody, happy Thursday and welcome to another Techstrong TV broadcast. Today is Thursday, April 14th. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I am so very excited to be here hosting today's show because we have a fantastic lineup of interviews for you. I am just so very excited. We're going to get things kicked off with a conversation between Alan and Ryan Wright, who is the founder and CEO of a company called That, which is a very, very interesting company. They have a product called Quine, which is an MIT licensed open source project for data engineers. It actually combines event streaming with graph data to create what That calls a streaming graph. It's kind of an interesting concept. Ryan actually breaks down the idea behind Quine, which is basically to take high volume data streams and build them into stateful graphs. Definitely good stuff there. Excuse me. After that, we have our Techstrong Women's Show, in which I am the host along with Tracy Bannon. And this one is a very special episode because we talk about generational diversity. It is something that I don't think a lot of organizations really kind of keep in mind as they are doing their hiring. There are so many differences between generations in the way they interact with each other, in the way they speak to each other and speak with each other, and the way they work. And so we break things down from the younger point of view in this episode. And so Tracy and I have Kristen Gary from Ignite Group and Hannah Hunt from the Army Software Factory on to discuss what they've seen in the workplace as it relates to generational diversity. They are two younger firecracker women, and I just really enjoyed our conversation. After that, we have our Something Old segment. This one is from the recent Predict 2022 event. This one features Niladri Chowdhury, who is the founder and CEO of Excellentro Consulting Services. And Niladri talks about, his presentation is titled Adapting to Industry Infinity, the new wow for the IT industry. This is a really interesting topic, and it's got a lot of takeaways, including a 10-pillar metamorphosis approach, which is required to achieve the complete customer journey, achieving the complete customer journey. So he talks about the changes that IT service providers have to bring in from both the customer and the product vendor point of view. So it's really a fascinating presentation. Want to check that one out for sure. After that, I'm back with the news headlines, and then I have a conversation with Jedediah Yu, who is the CEO of Delphix, and Ralph Laura, who is the CIO of Lumentum. Both gentlemen are members of an organization called sustainablet.org, and we discuss what the company or what the organization is and what its mission is, which is basically to define sustainable transformation programs, author some best practices and frameworks, as well as set some standards, and offer certifications, education, and training, and raise awareness for environmental and societal programs that can make our organizations and the world sustainable for generations to come. This is a movement that is steadily growing. It has been growing at a much faster pace over the last couple of years, as we all recognize just how technology is kind of wrecking this planet. So sustainable IT hopes to kind of help stem that just the awful pollution and environmental impacts that technology is wreaking on us, and hopefully make a difference in that. So it's a great organization, and this is a great conversation. After that, I've got the webinar's preview for you, and then Mitch Ashley comes on, and he has got a conversation with Den Jones, who is the Chief Security Officer over at Banyan Security. They discuss zero trust network security, its adoption, and strategies for leveraging existing investments in a company's zero trust platform. It's a great conversation, and Den brings to the conversation a lot of years of experience that he's had working with Cisco and Adobe as among other companies. So it's a great conversation, and really does shed a lot of light on zero trust and network security. Good stuff there. After that, we have The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Federico Kunze-Kulmer, who is the co-founder of Evmos, and they discuss how smart contracts and blockchain platforms can be used to compensate open source contributors and maintainers. Excuse me. This is something that we've been talking about a little bit in the industry, and this is a really interesting concept, and it's about time that open source contributors were compensated for their work. So hopefully this is something that will catch on in the industry as well. All right, as you can see, I'm getting very choked up over today's episode, but we've got a good one here, folks, and we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages. All right, we are back. Kicking things off today is a conversation between Alan and Ryan Wright, who's the founder and CTO of That. They are talking about That's launch of Quine, which is a new MIT licensed open source project for data engineers that combines event streaming with graph data to create a streaming graph. What a great concept. It's really relevant in today's data-intensive environment. So Ryan and Alan discuss how organizations can use the Quine technology to really harness their data and get some really actionable insights out of it. So great conversation. Let's go ahead and roll it now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. My guest this segment is Ryan Wright. Ryan's the CEO of a company called That. And they are also the folks behind a open source project that he's going to tell us all about. But first, let's welcome him on. Hey, Ryan, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, Alan. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you on. So, Ryan, I gave the folks a little bit of background, but you have to do better than that. Why don't you tell them a little bit about That, a little bit about yourself, and maybe we can talk about Quine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So That is a young company who has been working on a project for a very long time, and we are so excited to bring it to the community right now. So That is the company behind Quine. Quine is a streaming graph, and it's meant to make it far easier to take high volumes of data and interpret it on the fly so that you can understand what's happening in this data and achieve results that were previously impossible.
Great. You know what? We're going to dive in there. What about a little bit of your background?
Yeah, so for me, I have a technical background. I was a developer for a long time. I've led research and engineering teams. For the 6 years before founding That, I was leading cutting-edge computer science research funded by DARPA, which is really the origin story behind Quine as well. A lot of Quine was developed and tested in that DARPA environment on a really hard cybersecurity problem that's just really important for the industry. It's the problem of advanced persistent threats.
Absolutely. And of course, the APTs have been, they've been a problem. I'm trying to think. I left the last company I found it still secure in 2008 or 9, and they were already a major problem then. So it's got to be 2005.
Yeah, the core problem there, it's painful because the state of the art when DARPA began that program in 2015, I believe it was, the state of the art is that if an advanced adversary gets inside an enterprise network, then you're out of luck. You can't find them. You can't understand what they're doing. You can't stop them. And that's a terrible situation to be in, because there are very sophisticated, very advanced attackers out there who will get in and then lie low and slow and stay there, spread their attack out deliberately over a long period of time. And the modern tools just really weren't capable of analyzing a large amount of data over a huge area like that. And so that's why we spent more than 7 years now developing Quine to be that streaming graph, to be able to take that event stream, put that data together so that you can combine information about users and processes and the files that they open and the programs that they run and the computers that they run on top of and the network switches and emails, just everything that is a part of the enterprise environment. Pull it together, fit it together into a graph so that you can understand the relationships between those things, and then do it at a huge scale, extremely fast. And that was always the linchpin, was that existing graph tools were nice, they're really expressive, but they were always known to be for toy problems and good for small little experiments, but not good for large scale deployments. So that changes now with Quine.
Excellent. So, I mean, we got the use case out of the way, right? But let's talk about the underlying technology for this use case. I think, our audience is technical, right? And so, Ryan, we're familiar with GraphDB, TigerGraph, some of the successful graph database applications and databases that we're seeing in the market. But we haven't, it's the first time I've heard the term of a streaming graph. Right, and maybe we should start there. What do we mean by a streaming graph? And what you already said about we get, but streaming graph versus regular graph DBs.
Yeah, well, for Quine is a streaming graph that really lives in between the world of a database on one side and stream platforms like Kafka on the other side. Okay. So it's right smack dab in the middle. And so depending on which perspective you look at it from, it looks like both, or maybe it even looks like neither. But that's the world in which it lives in, with the goal being that we have to process data, we have to hold on to that data, so it can't just touch it on the fly as it flies by. We have to hold on to it so we can start combining it together and understand larger patterns that are spread out over time. And so doing that at a high volume was previously just impossible. And so the state of the art was you'd go hire 60 or 80 engineers and build a big complex microservice architecture to build your data pipelines. Mm-hmm. And that's at the heart of all sorts of products across a lot of different kind of industries, from cybersecurity to fintech to blockchain analysis and log analysis. And lots of different kinds of businesses have at their heart that sort of a data processing pipeline. And the real pain is that they're hard to build. They require a lot of expertise in the technical areas. And then they're really brittle. So when you need a change to that system, it requires the engineering team redesigning a lot of it, sometimes going back to the drawing board, even just throwing it away and starting over from scratch, because they get big and complex and hard to manage in that fashion.
Cool. That excellent. Ryan, I give you kudos. I guess it's not the first time you've been asked that, because you had it nailed down there. So Quine, as we mentioned, is open source.
Yeah.
Available on GitHub, the usual places. You guys are kind of managing it, the project and the community, from what I can see, right?
Yep, that's right.
And then we have that dot platform, which is it built on Quine, or is it Quine with enterprise functionality or commercial functionality?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. It's those two pieces. We've open sourced Quine just recently, so it's about a month old. Open to the world just recently, and the community is already thriving and vibrant and creating all sorts of examples of different kinds of use cases that we call recipes. So a user goes and downloads Quine and says, "Hey, I've got an idea. I could take my Apache logs and I could do some analysis on those logs and just stream out the results." Well, that sort of thing is really common and useful to lots of people. So users have posted those recipes on the Quine.io website. That become part of the GitHub repo as well. So a user takes whatever application they found that is useful and contribute it back and share it with other folks who can then just download the executable and run that recipe with a single command line. And you get the value that somebody else in the community has shared and contributed.
Yeah, so we're the folks behind DevOps.com here, right? So when I hear you talk about recipes, I'm thrown back to my old days, chef and cookbooks and all of that stuff. So makes sense.
So much work gets solved over and over and over again in the tech world. And so the open source approach and just this approach to sharing your results is really powerful. We all benefit from it. It's so easy to take and contribute back and then share what somebody has done. And so, we've seen dozens of different teams across different companies do exactly that. So they get started with Quine, they find a great application and then share it back with the community around them. And so sometimes even in some surprising applications too, like there's some fun blockchain analysis problems and other things of that sort.
Absolutely. So open source has become dominant, Ryan, as the dominant way of distributing and getting software. I had a conversation with a founder yesterday of they just raised their first round of money and was calling me up. They wanted to do a webinar with us because we do a lot of webinars, and I was like, well, what do you want to do with the webinar? Well, we want to get leads. We all want to get leads. What are you going to show them in the webinar? Well, we're going to show them the product. I said, oh, that's great. I said, and what are they going to do? Well, then they got to call us because they got to do a POC. We've got to have a sales engineer assigned to them, and we've got to give them write a custom script for them, which they'll have to execute and we'll have to watch. And I said, look, it's not 2005. You can't. People want to get software in their hands. They want to use it, and if you deliver delight, if they see the value in it, they'll go say, I want the commercial version, or I want to, buy it, whatever. But in today's world, if you don't have something that's open source or at least free, right, for a certain amount of users or however you want to slice and dice, it's a very hard road to hoe.
Yeah.
With that old-fashioned distribution kind of method.
Very much so. Plus, I've benefited. We've all benefited from open source, and so contributing something back is just, it's a good thing to do, and it's good business too. Because when you open source something, you create lots of value that wouldn't have been created. And for a company behind it, the question is, how do you capture some of that? And for that what that means for us is that users who are often running in production, and they want a support contract for that, so they've got experts on call anytime they need some help with something. That's where that comes in and offers the platform subscription for support to help those companies scale it to just insanely large workloads to go past the couple thousand per second that modern graph databases can achieve and take it past 1 million events per second and beyond. That sort of scaling factor. Plus, we've been able to build some really interesting applications on top of the streaming graph that give us new kinds of capabilities like novelty detection. This is part of the platform at that dot. And it's a new kind of anomaly detection for reducing noise and finding actually meaningful signals in a stream of data. So those sorts of things are the parts of the that platform that are built on top of Quine, the open source project. And so for anybody curious, go start with the open source and try it out and see what it can do in your environment. Because after 8 years of R&D and a lot of DARPA funding, which we're very grateful for, it's really new technology that has changed the game and changed what is possible in this space.
And I want to just repeat, that's Quine.io, Quine.io. Yep. But let's come back to what you were talking about, Ryan, about that dot, right? Look, I'm probably a little older than you. For a long time, all we heard was, well, the only open source company that was ever successful was Red Hat, right? The first $1 billion open source company. Of course, there were others, MySQL and the whole Linux field, but whatever. I mean, that kind of attitude has gone away, especially with things like the Linux Foundation and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and Apache and all, the whole foundational era of open source, if you will. And quite frankly, this smashing success of so many open source business model companies that, I've had tremendous success in liquidity events. Now, what we have discovered, though, that, look, the old model of open source where, well, we're going to make our bones or we're going to make our money on support and education. Yeah, those are pillars, part of the three stools in a three-legged stool, but not enough. We see a lot of open source companies or business models where we offer a hosted version of the open source project. So you don't have to worry about scalability. You don't have to worry about burstability. It's to a certain extent security and stuff like that, right? That's a very popular. Then there's the open core model, right? Where, look, the core of this is open source and we're going to give you, additional freemium, premium features and stuff. It sounds like you're playing in a little of all of them.
Yeah, it really is a little of all of that. The open core model is really our focus right now. So where we want to give away Quine to the community and just help people be successful. And if they have a use case that they'd like help with, then our team is standing by for that with the enterprise version as well, which has some extra capabilities built in for enterprise use cases.
Very cool. Ryan, we did it beyond the DARPA funding. Has there been any other funding into that dot at this point, or not yet? Yeah,
we raised over $2 million in a seed round, and we expect to raise a Series A here soon.
Very cool. Hey, man, you know what we didn't mention? So Quine is Quine.io, Quine.io. That dot is thatdot.com, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
THATDOT, right? It's not that .com, it's that.com.
Make sure we get that right out there.
It's a little bit of a joke for anybody who remembers /dot.
Sure. I used to live on /dot. It was good times. Anyway, hey, Ryan, thanks for coming on Techstrong TV, telling us all about this exciting new technology here with Quine. It's going to be interesting because, the nice thing about open source, too, is it's kind of like, once you set it free, if it comes back to you, it's yours. If it's not, it was never meant to be, but you don't know where it's going to go. And that's really, one of the beauties of the whole model. So keep us posted. Best of luck. Congratulations. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Alan.
My pleasure. Ryan Wright from that platform, the folks behind the Quine streaming graph. Check it out at Quine.io. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong, and we'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, we are back. Next up is Techstrong Women, our series celebrating the successes of women in IT and talk about their path to getting where they are today. In this episode, I, along with Tracy Bannon, my co-host, speak with Hannah Hunt, who is with the Army Software Factory, and Kristen Gary, who is with Ignite Group. We discuss generational diversity and how important it is to recognize recognize the differences in generations in IT, and this is regardless of gender or anything else. If you don't understand the generational diversity and how different generations interact with each other and with other generations, your company is doomed. That's all I have to say. We've got 4 generations of workers these days, and they've all got to be able to get along. So this is from the younger point of view, what they've seen in the workplace and some of the things that they've kind of picked up along the way to just to kind of get along in this world, basically. It's a great conversation. I hope you'll join us for it. We're going to go ahead and roll it right now. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Techstrong Women. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, a host, along with Tracy Bannon, who is my co-host. And in every episode of Techstrong Women, we have some amazing guests who help us collectively elevate the conversation around gender equity and parity by celebrating the successes of these wonderful people in IT. So today we have 2 very, very exceptional guests. The first one is Kristen Gary, who's a product manager over at Ignite Group. And then we have Hannah Feldman Hunt, who is the Chief Product and Innovation Officer over at Army Software Factory. I do want to point out that 2 of the reasons why we are having Hannah and Kristen on today's show is it is Women's History Month, and we've got to do that. I mean, we've got to really double down this. That's exactly. And then also Hannah and Kristen represent a younger generation of IT leaders. And when we're talking about diversity and equity, it's well beyond gender diversity and equity. It also is generational. So we are very, very excited about having this conversation that we're going to have with Kristen and Hannah. Tracy, I want to turn it over to you. If you have a couple intro words you want to say, and then we'll just get the conversation going.
Sure, you bet. So, hey, everybody, it's Trace Bannon. I always like to ride side saddle with Charlene for our recordings with everyone. And it is all about diversity. It is all about lifting up real technologists and making sure that we're highlighting amazing things that are happening with amazing people. So I had the luxury of meeting Hannah and working with her and in being introduced to Kristen, and realized that generational aspect, there are probably some good things for us to learn. So I'm going to start with Kristen. I think Hannah may have a tech problem that's going to cause her a quick reboot and she'll be back. But I'm going to start with Kristen and say, hey, we know that you're a product owner with Appian. Talk a little bit, or with focusing on Appian with Ignite. Talk a little bit about, what you're doing with low code, no code, and some of the challenges you're facing.
Yeah. So I didn't come from a traditional computer science background. So low code was super appealing to me. So I got started on Appian a while ago and I really liked it. And it's been kind of the gateway to learn a lot of other stuff, since I can kind of set up connections and learn tools kind of gradually as we connect them into Appian. But it allows for really quick projects, which I'm super into. I like fast moving things. We're able to put something in front of people really quickly, which is I really like that. And we can get people working with us. It's a lot easier to get them giving good feedback and being more collaborative when we can get something into action sooner and put it in front of them and get some real pointed feedback. So far, I really like it. That's kind of how I got into it. I see myself sticking here. I like the low code. I like the automation. And even being here a few years, I feel like there's still so much that I can kind of do with it and learn. So I don't feel like it's limiting by any means. So I really like the low code area of things.
It's really a growth area across, whether it's commercial or the government, where I tend to hang my hat a lot. But I'm finding that in some places there's a little bit of tissue rejection. Like there'll be some parts where of the organization say, "Oh, we need this right now. We need it. Almost. Here's my credit card. Shadow IT. I'm going with it." And there are other parts, especially the more traditional parts of IT, that say, "Wait a minute. We don't need another tool. We don't need another thing like this. woe back, stop. I don't want you here. What are you seeing, first of all, and how are you addressing that? I'd love to know.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing both of those things. I think on the front of people having more pushback about why do we have to use another tool, I think a lot of times like a short timeline almost translates a little bit to lower quality, which isn't the case, or maybe a point solution, which also isn't necessarily the case. So I think education on that side of things is most important for us. Again, if we can get something in front of them quickly to actually even just explain the power of low code before we're even into the solution discussions, it's really helpful on that front. And then on the other side of things, we definitely have folks who are kind of like, oh, low code, that means you can build it in 2 days. So there's the other side of the spectrum where we're like trying to level set without constantly managing expectations and keeping people excited and hopeful and like trusting of these low code platforms, but still trying to make sure things are quality and they're done safe and they're done in like a stable, methodical way.
And there's got to be some sort of, I'm sorry, Tracy.
No, go ahead.
Dive
Sean.
right in. But, one thing that we have heard a lot about low code and no code is you actually don't divorce yourself from the developers when you are working with low code and no code. It is as much about involving them in the process. You're just basically taking away some of the I don't want to call it scut work, but some of the more general, parts of the development, right?
All right. You're abstracting away the things that can be repeated. Just putting it out there.
Yeah,
and
thank you for putting
allowing
it into
there to be a little
DevOps
bit more security that's built in underneath and some more purpose-built aspects to it. And Kristen brings up a really good point that just because it's slow, it's faster, doesn't mean it's less quality. It means it's different. And there's still an SDLC. So yes, we can do it quickly, but we still have to vet it in order to get it out into wherever we're going to be hosting this or making it available from our productions, So yeah, folks, those are great messages, Kristen, really great messages. And Hannah, I see everything. Oh, your tech is back up and online. Right. As another amazing, incredible woman who's working in technology, you are someone that I interact with from a business perspective with some of our work with the Army. And I would love for you to talk about the work that you're doing with Create and the software factories.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to Kristen, I don't have a traditional tech background. I actually wanted to be a diplomat. My degrees are in international affairs with a focus on global governance and like international diplomacy. So very different pivot into where I am in the tech sector now. And it really just came from like a desire to learn and like better understand how the government works and what we can do to make it more efficient. I always wanted to work in the government. Like that was something that I was really passionate about, but then finding this like space to actually build software has been really, really cool. And so I kind of fell into this role very interestingly. I was an Air Force civilian in an acquisition organization and serving in that program manager type capacity, got really interested in how we're building software. And so when I was looking to transition to a different role, the Army software factory came up. I got connected with somebody, and I was employee number 3, kind of at the ground level. And I really enjoy what I do. In my role, I'm the chief of product, so I oversee all of our application teams. What's really cool about the software factory is that we are a soldier-led development shop. So all of our teams have soldiers from across the Army that are building and delivering capabilities for the force. And at the same time of that, I also, in conjunction with the Army CIO, co-lead the Army's DevSecOps environment that's known as Create, which is basically the platform layer that sits atop our cloud environment. And so being able to have that full spectrum of capability, the DevSec and Ops in one organization is really like how software should be built. And it's super cool to be a part of that and be able to see soldiers across all facets of the organization be able to learn and better understand how to build software, utilizing modern technologies and approaches and processes, and then actually deliver capabilities. So I am kind of like, it's just really wonderful to see. We started out with 10 people. Our organization has expanded about 150 people. And so just in the past year and a half. So it's been pretty cool.
That's amazing. I'm thrilled to hear, because you think about the government sometimes, and certainly no offense, but the government has a reputation of not being the most efficient and responsive and agile. So hearing that you have 150 folks in your organization, soldiers and I guess civilians as well, but who are actually making DevSecOps work effectively. That to me is an amazing story. It's really, really heartening to hear. So congratulations on that. That is some great stuff there.
I want to ask a question of Hannah, though, that ties it into what Kristen was talking about. Transformation is tough. I always use lowercase t. Helping people to build new muscle memory. It's tough, right? It doesn't matter if you've practiced it a certain way, even if it's only been practiced that way for a year. Doing something new is a little bit tough. Hannah, when you are working to onboard a new program, a new product, what are some of the challenges that you're running into with people either believing or disbelieving in what you're selling?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's super funny to kind of see it. A lot of organizations are very excited that we have soldiers building software. It took actually the first batch of our first cohort, the concept was very foreign to them. And they're like, oh, I can't trust soldiers to build software. Obviously, I need to outsource it to a contractor. And there are times and places for that, especially big weapon systems that have a lot of complexity to them. But for what we're building, soldiers have the most context because they've been doing this job their entire career. And so we often don't see nowadays see a lot of skepticism about soldier-led software development. We often see more skepticism about like cloud native software development and DevSecOps because it's not manual anymore. It's not something that I can go and do a checkbox and say, yes, you did all the things. It's much more automated and like ephemeral, and like things are changing constantly in an environment. You're never just at a steady, like there's no state where you could just take a snapshot and say that's the way it is. You're constantly building and tearing down VMs and pods and like whatever the case may be. So it's a very uncomfortable experience in the Army to move to this like DevSecOps model. And that's typically where I spend most of my time. Soldiers building software is no longer like, bad juju. People are seeing the results and seeing the software we're building.
I think they're still nervous, but no bad juju. I like that. I like that term. Yeah, I want to pivot just a little bit because you said something and I wrote it down. Yes, on my handy index card, that one of the types of things that you studied as an undergrad was international diplomacy and the governance aspect. Got to tell you, that actually seems like the best career for you. I'd really like to hear both of you. Hannah, first, if you could talk just a little bit about that. And then Kristen, I want to hear about your non-traditional education, how you got where you are from that. So Hannah?
Yeah, it's actually really funny. So my master's thesis was around like global terror, like Islamic terrorism and like cross-cultural communications. Wow. And like sometimes it really feels like that with the department.
Do we need to beat that out at all? Is that we can leave that in there? Okay.
Yeah, this is Hannah's personal view on the matter. Okay. But it is. It's like there's adversarial relationships and how do you build across like understanding the other person's culture, and in the DoD sense, it's like traditional legacy with like modern capabilities. And how do you like come that together and be empathetic and understanding, but also realizing like we need to change those things. And so I actually was joking with a coworker recently. She's like, yeah, like actually your degree was really beneficial to what you're doing currently, even if it wasn't actually building software. And I actually think, the more and more I think about it, I think it's true. I'm a big fan of the book Range, which talks about having a broader depth or length of like capabilities versus being specialized in one particular area and having it make you more successful as a person and in your career. And I think that's like spot on for me, especially with like my non-traditional background.
Yeah. So Kristen, I'm going to turn this over to you. You talked about having an interesting career path. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I started studying engineering science and mechanics, and it's not a super common major. So what that is, it's kind of the underlying mechanics of all engineering. So I learn about the mechanics between chemical bonds, but also mechanics in a bridge. So it's kind of all over the place. It's very kind of rudimentary across the board. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so it was a really great place for me to kind of start. And then along with that, I was really into biomedical engineering. So I did that too. They didn't have a major at Tech where I went to school. So that kind of went in as a minor. But it worked really well because it's a lot of just kind of systems engineering and figuring out how a lot of different parts are kind of working together. So my goal early on was to make prosthetics. I think that's still just the most interesting thing ever. But the classic engineering route, I think, like kind of right out of school, my options were a little bit slower pace of building, of developing whatever it was going to be. And so I started looking into technology, and I loved just the software aspect of it and the creativity aspect of it. I like the user interface aspects of things. And so that's a piece that I really didn't get to stretch much in the mechanical engineering realm of things. So that was probably my biggest push coming in, but it's kind of shifted now that I'm more appreciative of the types of teams I get to work on and kind of the speed of projects. So that's kind of how I got into it. Maybe at some point I still make it over to prosthetics. I think I'm gaining a lot of kind of good user perspective type of conversation facilitating things that would be really helpful to build a great prosthetic for somebody. But anyway, that's kind of ended up here. And I came in actually wanting to just do graphic design. And I was really lucky that my bosses were kind of like, let's try something a little bit deeper than that. So they sent me to training. And I've just really liked Appian ever since. And that's where I've been.
That's great.
So a chunk there that might be relevant to Hannah and the rest of the group. So between college and the tech transfer or transfer to tech, I worked in chemical demilitarization, where we were destroying old chemical warfare, which super interesting, but it was more so kind of at an operations stage. So not a lot of innovation and kind of new ideas, things like that. So that's why I ended up looking elsewhere and getting into tech.
But you did get to experience them. I call it the command and control structure. Like it's very, in some parts of the military, and Hannah is doing a great job busting this down, very flat organization. There's a lot of hierarchy, and there's a lot of yes sirs and yes ma'ams up and down the chain. And that it's different the first time you experience it. So
well, being a military brat, I can tell you that certainly.
That.
Yeah, you didn't know that?
I did not.
I went. Yeah, I could tell you stories, but I won't. Not in this. Not in this episode. Maybe another one. We'll talk about the military, Techstrong women. But one thing that really does, kind of perk my ears up when I'm hearing both of your educational background and how you got into the spaces, Hannah, yours is perfect for, your international relations. You're very diplomatic, so you're a great communicator. I keep thinking of the term, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Perfect. That's perfect for what you're doing. And then Kristen, you are more engineering in your focus and your base. So going into something like the development with Appian has been, I imagine that's been kind of I won't say it's been an easy transition for you, but it seems to be a very natural place for you to be. And I think what it underscores is the fact that we tend to move into the areas in which we are most comfortable. We may not be within the particular on that particular road. But we find our place, we find our niche. And whether it is in low code development or in the whole, any place in the military that has some sort of a communication component, I can see Hannah actually working in any of those realms. But because Tracy, you've got kind of a non-traditional background also. So, and now you're doing DevSecOps. And so I have a journalism background. So here I am doing this, but I never really did anything around tech, with the exception of reporting on it. And so, this has become kind of the natural niche for me. But I wondered, did you guys ever really think that when you started down the path that you did, that this is where you would be today?
No, I was trying to go as far away from computer science, I think, when I graduated school as I could. I think I got unlucky with some professors, and I didn't see really the possibilities of just kind of getting into computer science. So that was more so on my own. I feel like, though, as I am here, and even I've been here for a few years, just in the tech realm, that there is still people do really like to talk about whether you came from tech or whether you didn't come from tech. And I feel like that is frustrating, because it's when does that end? When does that 4-year credential kind of end for everybody? And we're back on a similar playing field. So I kind of came from tech, so it's stayed in the same realm, but there is still a distinction to some folks of that transition there.
I call that educational diversity. And I've run into that even still. Your undergrad was what? And I think you guys know that I just recently finished my master's in software engineering, although I've been creating software for a couple of decades. I won't cite the number of decades, but probably old enough to be your mama. And I run into that. It's amazing that we are trying to stovepipe folks based on education. Now, there's absolutely an amazing reason to have folks with different 4-year degrees in the research areas and in these advanced areas. But every developer doesn't need a 4-year degree in comp sci, trust me. And Hannah, this is someplace where you've spent a lot of time in helping, to change the lexicon, change this for folks. You want to talk a little bit about any hurdles you've run into in talking about education or the skill sets that people need?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I'm super passionate about too. You're right. Especially the way that government hiring is structured for civilians, you typically have to have a degree to be considered an engineer. They call it a positive degree in whatever engineering discipline it is. Even if you are a software engineer and you've been one for 10, 15 years, you still can't call yourself an engineer. So on paper, I'm an IT specialist. That is my occupational series because I don't have a degree in engineering. I have liberal arts degree. And it's something that's been very frustrating for me, on the civilian side, but on the military side, it's been kind of fascinating to see, especially the diverse set of soldiers that we have in our organization from an MOS perspective, or what their job series are. We have medics that are platform engineers. We have maintenance technicians that are software developers. And then you have the traditional kind of roles like the signal officers or the cyber officers that do have a background in software development. But more often than not, we're getting a large swath of the population that don't have any formal background, formal career in software development, yet did it as a side gig, or were really passionate about it and learned how to build software themselves. And it really goes to show that it doesn't matter what your educational qualifications are, or your credentials, or your certifications. Anybody can do this. There's still a strong impetus within the department that if you don't have your Sec Plus or your Linux Plus, you're not allowed to touch particular systems. And I think it's just old school thinking. There's a level of education we provide up front as part of the software factory. It's about 6 months of we call it technology accelerator, where they are getting a level of practical proficiency in software development, product management, platform engineering, and UX design. And that is it's almost like a general, almost like a general assembly type of course. So they're learning, and then they can go and implement that by building software. It's not like these soldiers aren't vetted already. All of them have clearances. They're obviously in the Army. So it's something I'm very passionate about, is that as we continue to transform who can build software in the department, that we're more inclusive to that, not just people who have the the positive degree in whatever engineering discipline.
So do you think that your background has also kind of helped you along in making the argument, if you will, to maybe other organizations or other departments that might not really see the value in having such a diverse group of folks actually doing the work?
I would hope so. I don't know necessarily, but I think having a non-traditional background and being able to demonstrate like a level of expertise in software development. Obviously, I'm not a coder, but I guess like from a business perspective, kind of understanding what's valuable and what's not, and like really being actively engaged in our DevSecOps environment in particular. I think demonstrates a level of like credibility that you don't need to have a degree necessarily. There's so much that's available on the internet, like to get upskilled. And then I'm surrounded by really smart people that help me become better every day. So you're never gonna, if there are people in an organization that assume they have all the talent they need, that organization is gonna fail. And so I'm always looking for people who are smarter than me, that can help explain things to me. And like, I can then in turn, like help make better business decisions for the organization or better user decisions for the organization. And that's something that I really care about, because I'm not, strongly technical. I can't code, but I can certainly talk the talk and understand the environments and try to do better.
I'm going to say that Kristen would probably tell you that, Hannah, you can code. I can show you how. Come on over to my world.
Come to the dark side. No.
Come to the low code side. Oh, yes. We'll be doing some amazing things over there.
Well, Kristen, I would like to kind of find out, you did mention the education aspect and the fact that you don't have a technical background per se, or an engineer background. So there's that maybe inherent bias that you've come up against within the organization as to, what your level of expertise or what your level of proficiency will be based on your background. Do you think that that's a pervasive thing? Or, is that something that, we're seeing? Well, it's something that I've seen in the past. People just automatically write you off if you don't have the right degree or whatever. But, are there other challenges that you guys have, Kristen, we'll start with you, but you guys have come across in your job as kind of a non-traditional, not linear, if you will, somebody who's come up in a way that's, not kind of ticking all the boxes, if you will. And even with respect to, your age, or, you're working with your, in different cultures that maybe you hadn't in the past, what I'm interested in finding out what you guys have, challenges that you guys have come up against in your, as you've risen through the ranks in your career.
Yeah.
Kristen, why don't we start with you? Yeah.
Sure. So I think, even I did even come from a technical background, and I still get questioned all the time because it's not computer science. People are very specific about computer science versus the rest of the world. So that's frustrating. It's definitely kind of still something I deal with. It's mostly something I deal with peers. It's not usually something and maybe I've got great managers and bosses who aren't going to question that stuff, but generally it is more, I know just over the years, even not like recently, just since I've been in kind of engineering and tech. And then Hannah hit on a good point that was kind of like made me think of some things about that. You've got a great community that you can kind of go to them, they're smart, and you can rely on them. That's the area where I feel like this distinction between CS and tech plays the biggest role, because I'll try to have these conversations that are very transparent, and I've got my whole guard down, because as long as I've been around, that's like the best way I can gain some credibility, is just being transparent. And I've kind of been eaten up the past few years because maybe they assume since I'm not CS, it's not a good question, or I haven't done my homework there. But I don't always feel that like I can be so transparent and let my guard down and like really try to dig in and start learning from my peers, because there is that like silly distinction between the two that creates like more barriers than I think it should.
So my question to you is, so how have you been dealing with that then? Because you're not the only one, and there are others who can learn from you. How do you deal with that kind of ism or that kind of bias, educational or not? How do you navigate that? Because you want to be able to just go and have the conversation. You want to be able to go and say, hey, I opened this up. I was taking a look at this. I haven't worked with this particular XYZ. What do you think, Joe? What do you think, Mary? What do you think, Rajiv? Tell me. How are you managing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think early on, I kind of had to make a decision whether I was going to shape myself a little bit differently so I could come off a little bit more like assertive and somebody I might not truly be, or I could stick to my guns and kind of say, this is how I like to work. I like to make an environment that's productive for this kind of work. And I also saw that like other people were having the same issues. So I didn't really want to just bend myself so that I could like hold my own in these conversations and maybe be a little bit more, I don't know, putting on a front that maybe I know more than I do so that I can be part of the conversation. And I didn't really want to do that. So I have just tried to gain trust. I just knew it would take a long time. And I've just determined that that's how I've been successful in the past. And whether I'm going through a hiccup now or it's like getting some other folks on board, I've just decided that that's where I'm going to stay. And I definitely needed to have some help to tell me that like that was okay. And just because they're doing it and maybe their moves feel a little bit more powerful, it doesn't mean like I have to shift to them. So I think just generally trying to stick to the way that I want to lead and like be on a team has been
one word. Authentic. Thank you.
Yep. That is the word for Techstrong women. Authentic.
Yes,
it is. It drives everything. So what about you, Hannah? Have you experienced these issues as well? And how have you dealt with them?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on what Kristen said. I certainly relate and empathize. I've had a ton of imposter syndrome moving into this role when I initially started because I didn't know anything, or it's not true, but I felt like I was really behind the curve on understanding how things should be and what we can do. And I had, again, a lot of coaching and mentoring and support, which is very helpful to see that I am competent. Like I don't need to think that I'm not. And I came from a culture that was very much not psychologically safe. So it was not, you couldn't ask questions, you couldn't show a level of vulnerability. And so here, what I've learned and what I've noticed is that if I'm vulnerable, if I'm asking questions, if I'm expressing like I'm struggling or I'm overwhelmed, as a leader, that then like opens up the ability for the organization to feel comfortable saying those things. Because if a leader's doing it, that means, okay, well, then I can mirror that behavior. And that can sometimes, not always be great when you're like maybe a little too vulnerable. But I tend to try to default to that way. I'm a very like honest person on how I'm doing. And it's served me well for the most part. I still think sometimes like a level of, I could have a little bit better level of maturity and realize some things I should say or some things I shouldn't say, or who do I say those to the right audiences? And I question myself all the time on like if I'm communicating effectively. But I also just like want to be, to your point, like my authentic self. And like, that's who I am as a person. I'm a pretty vulnerable person. And that seems to have worked out pretty well at the end of the day.
Well, if nothing else, you can sleep better at night. I think if you live your life in the most authentic way possible, sometimes you're going to piss some people off, but other times you're going to make some people happy. So it's a balance. But one thing that has kind of cropped up in what both of you guys are saying is kind of finding your way and being able to do that and recognizing that is the way that you want to go. Have either of you worked with mentors in the past, or is mentoring something that your organization offers? And is that something that you've ever even considered?
Yeah, so we have a built-in mentoring program. So we're all kind of paired up with somebody who's a little bit older, who has gone through it recently. But I think probably my most mentorship comes from the day-to-day meetings that I have with people who are just a little bit more senior, who I'm working more closely with. We have a pretty small company, so I get to work really closely with our CTO, Jason, which is awesome. I get to learn a lot from him, and I get to work with our CEO, Armand, a lot. So it's very short path between our teams of developers and kind of our leaders, which has been really great for me.
Yeah, and I rely a lot on mentors and like coaching and pairing. I'm a big like pairing together on solving problems. I've had a few mentors throughout my career in the department, and I've cherished them a lot. And I'm not like a formal mentee right now. But when I was chief of staff at Techstrong before coming here, I was very much the belly button of like, oh, I'm struggling. Let me go talk to Hannah about it. And I really enjoyed that. And that's what chief of staff does in essence. So like, it felt good that was it. And I think I get that sometimes here too, which is really nice. But we do have a women's group within the organization because we're pretty in comparison, in the military, it's about 20% female. So like we're a small amount of us. And so we really do try to like stick together. And have lunches. I think we have a lunch this Wednesday.
Great. So Tracy.
I was on mute. I have a question for that.
I saw your mouth moving, but there was nothing coming out.
It's because I try to keep myself on mute lest I make some noise. You're talking about how important it's been for you to have mentors and peer pairing. I got to ask, how are you paying it forward? How are you bringing others along on the journey? Because you're not fresh out of college. You're on your path, guys, and you are ripping up the pavement in an awesome way. So how are you mentoring anybody right now, formally, informally, or, what are you doing to help others? Kristen.
So like we've talked about, I have a kind of a soft spot for this whole like tech versus non-tech discussion. So usually when I'm doing a lot of homework, like recently I had to get prepared for a kind of architectural meeting in front of a big IT team. And after I'm finished that and I spend a few days doing research, I'll reach out to the other folks who I know might not know that stuff and say, hey, let's get up to speed on this. Let's take 15 minutes. I can kind of divulge everything that took me a few hours. So then when you get to that conversation, you can hold your own, you can have a conversation. Because a lot of the time, I think it's just building up each other's confidence in those conversations. And because we can hold our own, we absolutely can. We've like deserved to be in the places that we are, but it sometimes we just need a little bit, I think, of like some knowledge that we can rely on, something a little bit more material that makes us feel better going into it. So I try to just disseminate whatever I learned so everybody else has it in their back pocket as well.
Yeah. And in my organization, like I said, there's not as many like women in the military in general. So like being able to support and nurture the ones that are. And then on the civilian side, like my, like, I guess most like concrete thing is like our wonderful CISO is I was able to convince her to leave Kessel Run and come work for us. And she's like amazing. And I'm like obsessed with her. And she's probably one of the smartest, most like confident, calm people ever. And having her in the organization has like significantly increased the like level of empathy and caring. And I love that. And I like admire her and I want to act like she does. And she always says like Hannah for president. And I don't know, it's just nice to have like somebody at your level that you can like kind of come together with and work together both on a professional and personal level.
Well, you would not be the first young professional that I said, I may end up working for her someday. So.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Another woman in my organization named Natalie Weaver, and she's, I think maybe 2 years out of college, going back for her master's. She's just tearing up the pavement as well. Smart humans with really broad thinking skills. It's amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
So
we are starting to get low on time, but I did want to kind of bring up one topic that I think it's important, especially as we are, talking to the quote unquote younger generation, if you will, of humans here, and really taking a look at gender diversity in the workplace. We currently are, we have 5 generations of workers still in today's workforce. We've got the boomers, we've got the Gen X, we've got millennials. Wait, no, there's somebody else in between. Wait, boomer, I can't remember. So we start with Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, boomers.
No, it is the boomers. Are we at 4 then, maybe?
I guess that's 4. I thought there were 5, but anyway, be that as it may, we've got a lot of different communication styles in the workforce. We've got a lot of biases that exist in the workforce, and it's just generation to generation. My parents and my grandparents had completely different thoughts about women in the workforce at all. So I'm interested in finding out, with you guys being kind of I would say a rung lower than us, at least in generations, what challenges maybe you guys have come up against having to communicate and interact with the different generations, if you will?
I'm going to interrupt that and say that was very tactfully put. In interacting with the other generations. Okay, so that's the big question on the. We've talked a lot about different types of diversity. Obviously, there's Hannah, you've got 20% women, and 80% male. Kristen, I'm going to gather that you probably see something kind of similar to that, maybe a little bit higher with women. But it's that gender piece that's driving me crazy personally. I gotta know. Is it hard to communicate with somebody who's from a different generation? And how are you dealing with it?
Yes.
Kristen? Or Hannah? Take a pick.
It is. Also, the Gen Zs. I'm a millennial. Learning how to communicate with the Gen Zs is even now. I feel like an old lady. I gotta understand how these kids talk, and it's super funny. But yes, and it is a struggle. But I very more formal, sir, ma'am, Mr., Ms. Especially in the military, it's very formal, and so being mindful of that and in a sense adapting to it. This is something that I try to do in a communication very much. This is my degree and my background is meeting somebody where they're at and how they want to be addressed and how they want to be communicated with, and then slowly over time making changes to that communication so that it aligns with what I need from that person or what they can receive from me in a way that is much more maybe relaxed and less formal. But yes, it's a struggle, but I think more often than not, it's something that is workable. It just takes us some effort.
And what about you, Kristen? Have you found any other biases working with different generations? Beyond the communication aspect, because that is definitely something that I think every generation grapples with, is how to communicate with the other generations. But are there other things that you've come across in your workplace that is just central to one particular generation over another, and they've kind of posed challenges to you that maybe, I don't know, that if that it strictly is a generational thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I will say up front, I don't think I work with a ton of generational diversity. I work with a lot of peers. When I worked for the government, it was a little bit different. And if I'm kind of on some government engagements, there's definitely that different level of communication that we were talking about. But I'm not sure if I've really had too many hurdles up to this point outside of communication. I also think I personally am a little bit more old school. I am typically finding myself kind of in the boomer time frame in terms of how I'm thinking, maybe, or the way that I might want to manage teams and get to goals and things like that. So I hope I'm maybe a connection point between the two generations, but so far not too many hurdles in my specific workplace. But but small frame in the whole scheme of things.
So you're saying that you're not ageist then. So you're not like, oh, these gray hairs, they just don't get what we're doing down here. They don't understand what we're doing.
No, it's usually something other than age that I feel like is putting some disconnect in there, but
a quality that has to do with their ability to comprehend as opposed to any other genetic property or such. So
I think it's more about having an open mind about things. If you can just kind of expand your mind and open your mind to different new ideas, I think that's the best way to approach whether it's age, whether it's gender, whether it's whatever nationality, whatever. It's all about having an open mind. Speaking of that, we have some, I think maybe 2 minutes left before we need to shut things down. So do want to kind of open the floor to Tracy, if you have any final questions, or Hannah or Kristen, if you guys have any final thoughts. Tracy, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just do a quick little round table and we'll close it.
So I'm gonna thank Kristen, Hannah, and always Charlene. Thank you. This has been a fantastic discussion, and it opened my eyes because I expected there to be a whole lot more. Those older folks, or they're not. I expected something different. So you've opened my eyes. Every time we do any of these recordings or any of these shows, I learn something. So thank you for that bit of education. Why don't we close with asking you both the same question, 60 seconds. What advice do you have for your 10-year younger self? Kristen?
I'm a very sensitive person, hopefully not into the way that it gets in the way, but I wish I could have told myself 10 years ago that you can really use that to your advantage. There's empathy there, there's perspective, and it took me a long time to get there. So that's what I would tell myself, and probably a lot of other younger people.
Thank you, Kristen. Hannah, how about you?
I'd probably tell my younger self to not take myself too seriously. I often think I need to be perfect at everything. And if I'm not, then obviously people see me as flawed, and therefore I'm flawed. And rather I'm just another, they call it bozo on the bus. I'm just another person that's like helping to support an organization. So definitely not taking myself too seriously.
Thank you, ladies. Charlene?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. And thank you, Kristen and Hannah, for sharing your insight. What a great conversation. I echo Tracy's sentiments. This has been very eye-opening, and I hope there were some takeaways, lots of takeaways for the audience in today's conversation. But thank you guys for being our guests today, and want to thank the audience also for joining us. And we have got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up is our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2022 virtual event that we held a couple months ago. This is a presentation by Niladri Chowdhury, who is the founder and CEO of Excellentro Consulting Services. His presentation is titled Adapting to Industry Infinity, the new wow for the IT industry, talking about the way we are using products and services to create value and give customers a complete great experience for their entire journey. Customers and IT service providers both need to change the way they work. So Niladri talks about ways organizations can kind of refactor or rework the way that they work. And he presents a 10 Miller metamorphosis approach to making that happen. It's a great presentation and a lot of takeaways. So hopefully you could stick around and watch it. And we're going to go ahead and roll it right now.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be part of the Predict 2022 from Techstrong Group. And I am Niladri Chaudhary, CEO of Excellentra and the Chief Organizer for DevOps India Summit. Today, we are going to talk about the prediction, but before that, we need to understand what is the current situation. So what we see is that there is a lot of change that has happened from the past. We are in a new paradigm. And as Carlota Perez says, the new paradigm always comes wrapped in the old. So we need to change ourselves to adapt to this new paradigm. We are in the middle of the new industrial revolution. And it's not going to be just industry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. More and more industrial revolution will keep happening due to the change in the new technology and due to the change in the socioeconomic needs. We need to be adapting to that to be able to satisfy the customer. Customers today don't get satisfied by just delivering something. They are there looking at the entire journey they use the product or service that we are providing. So we need to provide them with something that creates value for them. And value is nothing but the perception of the customer. So when we are developing something, when we are maintaining some infrastructure or network or database, no value is created until and unless that product or service goes and the customer is able to use it to generate the expected value, the expected benefits. So we have to move towards that. We have to think in terms of creating value for the customer. Today, we don't use things like a CD. We don't buy a song. When we are using a Spotify, any streaming, Amazon Music or YouTube or Amazon Prime Music or any of these streaming systems, they are not providing us a song. We are buying an entire entertainment experience. We have also seen that today there is no organization which can survive without being able to use technology to the best of their capability. If we cannot use the technology, we will be outsmarted by our competitors and we will not even be able to sustain. And pandemic has created this need a much more. So IT is no longer a cost center of a company. IT is business. If we do not have IT usage properly, the business is going to die. Will you be going to a bank and open an account who does not provide you with an online banking facility? I think most of us will answer as no. So we can understand that how important IT is. So we have to adapt to this, and that's where we have to change our way of working. We have to also understand that there is no organization today which works completely on their own. Still, large portion of the organizations, barring a few, like Capital One and some other organizations, everybody depends on the service providers, the system integrators. And it is important for these service providers, these system integrators also to change. Till now, I think we have all heard about predictions which is related to the product, which is related to the way of working, technology, and some processes from the point of view of the customer. But how many customers can work on their own only? While we see there is a little bit of transition where customers are taking up the entire IT work as their own because it has become that important, but there is still a huge chunk which has to operate with the help of service providers. So what is important is for the service providers to change their way of working. So what we see today, the change that we are talking about is in all these aspects. I call it the 10 pillar of metamorphosis. The first, and each of these 10 pillars, I'll go a little bit and tell what is my prediction here. So the first is internationalization to globalization. We know localization, process of adapting a product or service to a specific geography. We know internationalization. When we see a Burger King or a McDonald's having specific taste and flavor of the country in which it is providing, that is one, internationalization. But today we are going into globalization, activity that brings people, culture, and economies of different countries closer together. People who are working to deliver the service are from different parts of the world. The customer to whom we are servicing is not operating in one geography, but multiple geographies. So we have to look at them. We have to work with people from the customer as well as from the supply side, the service integrators. We have to look at it, people from different parts of the world working from home, from different geographies. We have to look at it in that perspective. So we need, first of all, to move beyond frameworks, to break the silo of frameworks to see what is most useful in our scenario. We need to collaborate and have hypothesis-based development so that we work with the customer, we work with the different parts of the organization to see what makes us to deliver the best value. We need to give autonomy to the teams that are working. And all this requires us to have observability in the entire value stream. So the system integrators, the partners, what we will see as per my 2022 prediction is more and more system integrators will be strategic partners. They will no longer be vendors. People who will not be able to be a partner is not going to be able to sustain. Only vendor is not going to sustain. They have to have their skin in the game in terms of the outcome, in terms of the value creation, in terms of growing the business. I've already started seeing from the different system integrators that the new contracts that are happening are very much oriented towards outcome-based payments. A lot of collaboration needs to be there. So we have to move to deliver with partners, with collaboration, with people from different parts of the world coming together in a collaborative manner with one shared objective, everybody having to have the same. And that will require a lot of regulatory changes in how we work together. And as we said, we need servitized product. That means we are not buying a song, we are buying a musical experience. Uber is not providing us a taxi service, it is providing a travel experience. We need to look at it. And we need to look at it from the point of view of outcome. And here we have to understand that every customer is not same. I use a banking system specifically for the purpose of a corporate banking account, whereas someone else uses the same banking software as a salary account. Somebody uses it as an investment, and somebody uses it as a means of livelihood as a retired person. Everybody's need is different. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to do customized mass production. We have to look at the outcome, not the deliverables. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. And that requires holistic understanding of the entire domain, holistic understanding of the IT system. And that's where, as Dr. Mick Gersten mentioned in his book, Project to Product, we need to move into a product team. We need to move into a value stream team, each one responsible for the value stream, because people cannot know everything for every system that is running in an organization, but they can obviously know only a few of them. So we need to have smaller teams, as we know from the Conway's Law. And we should be able to deliver those small chunks of work repeatedly, faster, because things are changing. We need to adapt. Again, as Carlota Perez says, this is a time of great opportunity. But if we cannot adopt or cannot adapt to the changes, it is a time of great peril too. So we have to deliver customized, servitized outcome to our customers. Customers today are looking at a repetitive, recurring revenue model. So we need to see how we can provide it like as a platform kind of a service. Obviously, security, governance, and compliance is going to be important. But we'll see that later. So the prediction here is we have to move to a value stream team. We need to look at a holistic approach. We need to look at delivering outcome to the customers to make their business grow, not to save a few $100,000 in cost. Because a minute of outage is costly. We need to stabilize the system. Adding more people to take care of more and more incidents is not the solution. So we talked about customized mass production. So while we are saying customized, we are saying it's also mass production. While Niladri wants a black car, there are another 9,999 people who wants a black car or a pink laptop. So we need to customize to those personas using the system, the service. So we have to create that experience throughout the entire journey, and we have to look at it. And that is possible when we bring in the customer and collaborate with them. There are many organizations who have started this hypothesis-based development. They are bringing the customer to a portal. They are working for a month, 2 months to solve a business problem. And then once both are satisfied, goes out and implements it. That is going to be more and more in future. And service providers have to adapt to that kind of a change. They have to work together with their customer, which also means that our product vendors of the different products should have to make their system to be able to cater to these kind of needs, where people can work from different places, collaborate together, work together to deliver the outcome that we are looking at. As we call it, the co-create the value. We need to be much more oriented towards open network platform. So when we are talking about open source, we are talking about open source software. We have also seen open source hardware. But now we are talking about even open source network platforms. We have to spend more in terms of contributing towards open projects for open network. We have to look at interoperability. We have to create that governance body that is required for this open kind of a platform to work. Obviously, network security will become more important. So that is another area which will have a lot of need coming up for the skill set. We need to change our metrics to understand whether our open network works or not. Legal aspects, transparency and trust has to be there so that this open network works with multiple vendors having interoperability, as we see in our mobile. And we need people, organizations to spend on the innovation to make this happen, to have it more network as code Obviously, everything cannot be done by one organization. So we need to look at network partners. So we will see more and more partnership happening. We will see more and more organizations. My company may be having a competition in one geography with a company X, but we are partnering with company X in another geography because that company has strength which will help us to provide the service to the customer. We need to start understanding that and work in a cooperative manner. Transparency, collaboration comes in, value sharing comes into play. Obviously, loosely coupled architecture, our decentralization of work, giving autonomy to the teams, all these will be more and more important, not only within the organization, but also to the partners. We need to have a different horizontal governance framework. And there has to be a value proposition to both, to the partners. So here, working in terms of a product team, platform team, with the different partners will be of use. And this will also help us in scaling. We need to have assessments related to specifically on how the partners are performing. And this requires a lot of training, experimentation, and learning. Now, with so much of moving parts, so much of smaller things happening, security is going to be very, very crucial. Today, even after so much of hacks, so much of money being lost in attacks, I still do not see much of effort being put, much of money being spent on doing security right. Still, we have the concept of there is a security team, expert team who is responsible for security. We have to move to DevSecOps, and that's what is going to happen. More and more organizations will realize that, and there is going to be a huge need for security experts, for people, developers, testers, infrastructure, network, database, everybody to have not only just their own skill set, but to have the skill set of the knowledge of security. Security has to be looked at every stage throughout the life cycle. And what we see among all these things, what is most important is human beings. So we cannot further look into human beings as machines, as resources. We have to look at them as capital, as assets, as somebody who is not like a machine. So we have to start thinking in terms of a work family culture. I'm not only talking about a work, having a better work-life balance. That is there. That has to be there. Psychological safety has to be there. But we have to make it into a work family. We look after each other. A lot of learning, self-learning, a human-centric approaches to be brought in. And we have to bring in technology even in our human capital management. We have to align our partners, people, as part of the human capital. We cannot treat them as separate. You are a vendor resource. You have to go and walk 1 kilometer further where you can have your food. You cannot have your food in our own canteen. That approach will not work. If you want everybody to be together to think in terms of how the business grows, you have to treat them also like that, as part of the family. That is again another change that is going to happen. And we will need cadence. So many companies talks about CI/CD. A continuous delivery doesn't mean just using some tools. Continuous delivery means there is a cadence, there is a rhythm. Even our non-IT functions like your procurement, logistics, human resource, the current so-called human resource, they all have to be in the same rhythm. You cannot have your 2-week sprint and your appraisal at the end of the year. The objective of appraisal is to improve. And that has to happen at the end of every sprint. So we implement the change in the next sprint and do better. Yes, there is a separate compensation and promotion kind of activity which needs to be looked at separately. But regular improvement related appraisals has to be different. And that is what is changing, which I see in many organizations. And I expect that more organizations will pick up. And it is not going to be employees of our own employees and service provider employees. It will all be measured in the same context, in the same denominator, which is the common shared objective. Obviously, there's a lot of effort and lot of money which needs to be spent on continuous improvement, experimentation, and learning. We have to further utilize the concept of dojo. But what I predict is we are going to move to virtual dojos, no longer physical dojos, as we are not coming together physically in one single place. It has to be now virtual. So we need to have experimentation. We need to have upskilling and cross-skilling. So that's why, again, that value stream team, that product team is very important, which is a cross-functional, autonomous, self-sufficient, self-organized team. And our metrics also has to be oriented towards that. Psychological safety obviously is important here. Experiential learning will add value. Now, among all these things, we cannot have leaders being left out. We need more transformational leaders. Now, my prediction here is that leadership has to come out and be more active in the whole thing. Today, in this new kind of scenario, we don't need people management. We do not need that looking at Gantt charts and looking at certain dashboards of Jira and all, just to see who is doing what and what is not happening. We need, if we are trusting people, that means we need to do different things as a leader. We need to be transformational leaders. So leaders themselves needs a lot of upskilling. So there's a need which is going to rise for upskilling the leaders. Even though they may not everybody be coding, but they need to have enough understanding of the systems, of the domains, not just people management. And then only they will be able to satisfy the need of facilitating their team, guiding them, helping them to perform to the best of their ability. They will be able to create that psychological safety. They need to understand the strategic partnership needs, not the vendor kind of a relationship. So strategic partnership with value network partners and with customers and not just a vendor. They have to have that vision. So when we are looking at the transformational leader, the 5 dimensions like supportive leadership, vision, inspirational communication, intellectual stimulation, supportive leadership, personal recognition, all those 5 dimensions has to be there in the leaders. And they need that input to make them realize what is expected of them and what they should expect of a initiative, a transformation initiative. And this transformation is going to be evolutionary transformation, the small T of transformation, not the capital T, not the Big Bang transformation, which fails most of the time. So there's a lot of change in the leadership that is going. But with pandemic, what we see is a lot of the senior leaders as of today are also going out. They don't want to carry on anymore on the work. They want to retire. So a lot of the middle management is suddenly being pushed into the leadership position. Now that is going to create a problem because they are not used to it. They don't know what is expected. They are suddenly brought into this new environment and they don't know what to do. So a lot of handholding, a lot of training has to be focused and oriented towards leadership for them to really understand. Otherwise, it is going to be a bigger problem for the organizations to sustain. And finally, we need to look at the environment consideration. So we have to innovate, but we have to innovate thinking about the environment. We have to bring in sustainability. We are looking at biochemistry mixing with IT. We are looking at DNA is being used for storage. We see that how a piece of code of Python is equivalent to a 5-car emission. So we have to think in our architecture, in our choice of tools, in our way of working as to how we can reduce processing so that we reduce consumption of energy. We need to work from home. We need to have a hybrid model to make sure that we balance emissions in terms of the office usage, the energy usage in the office, the transport, and all these things. We need to code in such a manner that we use less processing. We need to architect it so that we have been always telling we need lesser latency. But no, we have to have the latency as much as possible, which is not going to disrupt the business. Because if we try to extensively reduce latency, it means more processing. It means more energy consumption. We have to have distributed architecture so that the data travel is less. So all those we have to look at. We have to look at green coding practices. We have to look at ways of reducing emission, higher latency, having things like auto scaling, DNA storage, remote first strategy. Querying of database has to be more efficient. We need to travel only by exception. Platform as a service is going to help us. Energy efficient collaboration tools. Design and build hardware efficient applications. Now, these are the areas where there will be more focus if we really want to sustain. And organizations which are going to sustain are going to spend more on these, including the service providers. So with this, I come to the end of the session. If you have any queries, you can reach me on my LinkedIn with my name. And if you want to understand more about these topics, you have my book, which is Adapting to Industry Infinity, where you will get more details and you can connect to us. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com is an article about the agile way of working and whether, 20 years on, it can survive in the era of hybrid work. The Agile Manifesto turns 20 this year, and while many of the core tenets are still applicable, the world has changed considerably in the last 2 decades. Changes are most definitely needed, as software leaders still find themselves struggling to navigate the murky waters of the 21st century project management to get the most out of their management team. Developers have many complaints about Agile, but most of them boil down to the fact that they often spend more time planning for work than doing it. They can also feel disconnected from the bigger goals of their project, being trapped in an endless list of to-dos without the time to think holistically about the features they're creating. In the new hybrid and work environment, the Agile Manifesto, as it was written, wouldn't necessarily hold water. Many of the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto continue to be outstanding guidance that is applicable to most developer teams. There is, however, some nuance that should be considered for a couple of them. This article takes a look at what's very much applicable and what should be tweaked to accommodate the new way of working and the developers. And we look at ways in which organizations can retain their talent as the developer role evolves. Traditional development roles are rapidly evolving due to increased remote work and the Great Resignation. Company leadership must also adapt to retain that talent and ensure the success of their dev teams. The role of development teams is changing fast, and leaders must keep pace to retain IT talent and safeguard the health of their organizations. With that in mind, this article offers up 3 ways organizations can support their development teams as they navigate the changing development standards. As development methodologies evolve to accommodate pandemic-triggered challenges and IT hiring gaps, the developer role will continue to change. In 5 to 10 years, it will look much different than how it looks today, and companies must be willing to embrace these changes to ensure the success of their IT and development teams. All right, in news, Radware has launched an API approach to securing multiple clouds designed from the ground up to be an extension of a DevSecOps workflow. Radware Secure Path makes it possible to invoke any of the company's cloud security offerings via an API, eliminating the need to depend on inline security platforms that require separate consoles to be managed. The out-of-the-path approach makes it easier to consolidate the management of security across multiple clouds. The API approach allows application requests to go directly from the client to the application server and reduces complexity and latency, eliminates routing changes, and increases overall availability. DevOps teams can now access the entire Radware cloud security portfolio, including the Radware Web Application Firewall, API protection tools, and a service that thwarts DDoS attacks via a consistent set of APIs. The company will continue to make those offerings available to be deployed inline or out of path as IT teams see fit. On Container Journal is a guide to Kubernetes spot node savings. If you're hesitant about introducing spot nodes into your Kubernetes clusters, you're not alone. Despite their bargain value, spot nodes offer no availability guarantees, which can make leveraging them feel like a high-wire act with no net. Some dev teams are unaware that the 3 biggest public cloud Kubernetes services now support spot instances. However, each cloud provider clearly warns customers to use spot instances for fault-tolerant applications only, and that the provider cannot guarantee availability. Thus, it falls to the teams running Kubernetes to identify the workloads that are appropriate for spot instances. Without a reliable method for vetting workloads, this becomes a high-stakes gamble. Choose correctly and you save up to 90% on cloud resource costs. Choose incorrectly and you can suffer expensive downtime. Lucky for you, this article is here to help, providing a spot readiness checklist that can help take the risk out of incorporating spot instances in your clusters. By applying this checklist into your public cloud Kubernetes workloads, you can more safely and accurately recognize the workloads that can be safely scheduled on spot instances and identify those that shouldn't be running on spot, and take advantage of meaningful cost savings without risking availability issues. All right, over on Security Boulevard, we offer up some insight into the cybersecurity talent pool and the bubble that currently exists. There are around 2.72 million unfulfilled cybersecurity jobs as of October 2021. That is according to ISC Squared, which means existing cybersecurity professionals are in the catbird seat. But while in the present, that gives those experienced candidates a lot of leverage and the ability to write their own ticket, when the bubble does burst eventually, they could be in a world of hurt if they burned bridges or in the industry or didn't keep up with necessary skills. Between innovation, increased merger and acquisition activity, and the exponential increase in cyber threats, security professionals will remain highly sought after for the foreseeable future. But there are certain things those currently in the industry really should be doing to continue to hone their skills, both technical and non-technical, so that when the bubble eventually does burst, and they all do, they'll remain in demand. And finally, we look at ways to fight back against the ransomware endpoint threats. As 2022 rolls on, the latest threat intelligence data from WatchGuard makes it clear that endpoint devices are a ripe target for cyber attacks. Malware is also becoming an increasingly simple endeavor for cyber criminals, even those who are new to the space. Combating these escalated threats at the endpoint requires organizations to look at all the ways threats could succeed and tighten up controls in each element: user activity, the operating system itself, policy and access controls, antivirus software, suspect or abnormal byte sequence detection, a chain of trust, virtualization, and cloud-based computing. Wow, that's a lot of endpoints. This defense in-depth strategy is a multi-layered approach that uses physical, technical, and administrative controls to safeguard an organization against ransomware threats. This article lays out what organizations should consider in creating a defense in-depth strategy that will keep their entire infrastructure secure, even from threats at the endpoints. All right, that is it for the headlines. I will be back on Monday with a brand new batch. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day and a great weekend. Please, whatever you do, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Jedediah Yua, who is the CEO of Delphix, and Ralph Laura, who is the CIO of Lumentum. And we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability and a new initiative that both are involved in called sustainableIT.org. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate your being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So I wonder if, before we actually get started on that conversation, Jedediah, can you tell us a little bit about Delphix?
Absolutely. We're the industry leader in DevOps test data management. We provide a DevOps data platform that helps companies release software faster, at higher quality, and with better data security. So we help protect things like your consumer data privacy as companies continue to innovate with their applications.
Awesome. All right, great. And Ralph, if you could introduce us to Lumentum, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Lumentum is a global manufacturer of photonics. So we make optical communication modules and devices that power data and telecom networks globally.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Interesting technology there. So I really, really love the idea of this new organization that you both are involved in, sustainableIT.org. It seems as though we are hearing so much more about sustainability issues and just the need to address sustainability in the IT sector because, I don't know if it's just because over the last 2 years, we've been relying so much more on technology. It kind of hasn't done much for our carbon footprint, so to speak. So would love to hear how you guys got involved in sustainableIT.org, how this came to be, and what you guys are planning or what you aim to do with it. Jedediah, why don't you get us started, please?
Yeah, Charlene, as you mentioned, over the last couple of years, there's been increasing reliance on information technology and technology systems, and that is really predicted to continue to grow over the next years, this next decade. Technology, it's really a privilege to work in the technology industry, but as technology continues to increase, it will drive more and more electricity consumption, bigger and bigger carbon impact. If you look at data as an entire history of mankind, so you have this explosive growth rate. And if we don't really take steps to make sure that our technology systems are sustainable, our programs, our companies, our technology programs are sustainable, we might not get a chance to really reverse the current course and trends. So that's really the beginning of it. We've talked to technology leaders at many of the world's biggest companies, and we basically decided that we needed to unite technology leaders from the tech industry and the world's biggest companies to set standards, define best practices, and really drive towards a more sustainable of operating the digital parts of all of our businesses.
I think that's so very important. And I'm going to let you go ahead and take it, Ralph. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, so we've organized sustainableIT.org as a nonprofit, and it's really formed and led by technology executives who want to advance sustainability around the world through their technology leadership. And most of us have this challenge that our companies, or many companies these days, have an ESG initiative within the company, so around environmental, society, and governance. So the challenge is, hey, as an IT or technology leader, how do I most effectively support that, enable that, and maybe even lead that? Well, as opposed to sort of sitting in a room by ourselves within our own company and sort of figuring that out, we thought the most effective way to solve that problem is to align, a set of like-minded people around a common set of problems, share best practices, share concerns, share knowledge, and try to align activities. And then once we've done as much of that as we can, share that knowledge with as many people as we can to try to move this forward more quickly.
Okay, all right. So, Ralph, what is it that the sustainabilityit.org is? What are you guys tasked with? Are you looking to create guardrails or kind of help with legislation, or are you looking to create some best practices and just kind of create a groundswell there?
Yeah, our mission is really to define sustainable transformation programs. As you said, author best practices and publish frameworks in this space, set standards, but potentially certifications to help kind of align and enable some of those activity, provide education and training, and then ultimately to raise awareness for kind of environmental and societal programs that make our own organizations and the world at large more sustainable for generations to come. And we do that through things like best practices, research standards, global awareness and recognition programs, community education and training, and ultimately enabling this sort of transparency and accountability work that a lot of us are kind of engaged in already in our own companies.
Awesome. Great. So Jedediah, how are you guys going about doing this? Are you just kind of banging the drums and getting the word out organically, or have you aligned yourselves with any associations or organizations that currently exist that might be able to you guys can kind of piggyback off of, or what is your game plan here?
Yeah, we're very much working with a lot of existing companies and major programs that exist today. But we started with technology leaders from many of the world's biggest companies. And so many of them already have their internal programs. They've done internal research, and it's about gathering all of that intelligence into one platform for change.
So, yeah, I think the idea of sustainability, or having the conversation about sustainability, has really become so much more important because, if you think about the pandemic and the fact that everybody was sent home and working from home, that put a lot of stress on data centers, and then just the increase in video conferencing and other technologies, just day-to-day use of the technologies, really kind of, I don't want to say it kind of blew up the data centers, but it really did increase the use of data centers exponentially. But there are other things too that occurred, that have been occurring, that has really kind of given rise to the need for organizations to address sustainability. So, where do you see organizations kind of moving when it comes to sustainability in general? Do you think that organizations are doing enough currently, or that there's enough focus being put on sustainability, or do you think that we have a whole lot more to do in that area? Jedediah, I'm going to let you answer first, but I would love to get Ralph's comments as well.
Yeah, I think we're really at the start of the journey. I don't think companies are doing nearly enough. Many programs, when they think about sustainability on the environmental side, they think about very simple programs like digitizing paper processes and things like that. But as you mentioned, over the course of the pandemic, we had a huge reliance on information technology, huge increase in video conferencing. But if you look at the full picture of that, so yes, the IT environmental impact is increasing and we need to get control of that. But in many cases, that offset the need for people to travel from place to place. Fly, drive, go into offices, travel for work. And so that had a reduction in total carbon impact on the planet. And so I think it's important to think about the full picture of impact. And in many cases, if you ship digital, sustainable transformation programs, you can reduce the impact a company has on the planet, even while you're increasing some of the IT expenses that are enabling that. So you have the primary effects of the business that you want to go after first. And so that's a really big part of our charter, is to look at every major industry, define sustainable digital transformation programs, and then get companies moving along those journeys. A secondary focus will be, how do I make my IT more efficient over the long haul? So you can look at things like public clouds. Well, they consume a huge amount of power, cooling, and footprint as these massive data centers are built by tech giants. But if you were to eliminate all of the disparate data centers that companies manage on their own and trade them in favor of these big clouds, well, then the clouds are actually 10x more efficient in total. So it's a bit of a journey, and you have to look at full accounting. And I think that's why you really need to have a dedicated organization focused on these elements that can really make a difference for the planet.
Yeah, and that's why I think that this focus on transparency, accountability frameworks is really key. Because again, many of us, to my point earlier, we already have a corporate initiative around ESG. We're focused on that. Now, many companies have done things like there's a large technology company who set a carbon neutral by 2030 goal for all their products and services. So many of us have these initiatives we're driving toward. But to Jed's point, it's complex math. It's not something as simple as kind of measuring your power bill at your corporate headquarters, or looking at your e-waste stream and so on. Because we live in a very complex ecosystem: cloud consumption, as a service models, home use of technology, and energy consumption at the home, people remote. So building a more complex kind of models and frameworks, and then allowing people to utilize those in a way that gets them the kind of transparency and accountability that they're looking for is part of our goal here. And then, like I said, so many of us are trying to solve these problems independently, that the power of all our minds together seems a bit better than each of us trying to solve it one-on-one.
So when you guys, I'm sorry, go ahead.
As an example, if you look in the financial services industry, if you ship the right digital applications for your consumers, you can allow them to do everything they could do in a branch office from their phones. That keeps them from driving to and from these branch offices, trucking paper between branch offices to reconcile all these transactions, and maybe even closing up branch offices. That in total can have a very positive, sustainable impact for that industry. And so we're trying to define programs like that in rank order that companies should really undertake that help their business and help the planet all in one.
That's great. That's great. And when you guys are looking at that, the question I have is, are you looking at it from kind of a soup to nuts initiatives, like everything from application development to end of lifing actual hardware? It just kind of doing the entire life cycle, if you will, because we hear so much about ways in which organizations can reduce their carbon footprint, but you can actually take it back farther than that. I mean, there are certain practices that you can adopt in your application development process that actually can help reduce the increase sustainability and reduce the carbon footprint.
If you can raise education and awareness, right? It's sort of like the old design for manufacturing idea. It used to be you'd wait till the end of the line, you'd take this design and attempt to manufacture it, and then do process and quality improvement at the end. But if you can move that thinking up to the engineering side, you can dramatically improve efficiency and effectiveness of that model. The same applies to software development and technology in general.
Yeah, if you think about the DevSecOps, where development teams are thinking about security early in the life cycle, they should also be thinking about sustainability. How do we automate more of the processes? How do we burst to the exact capacity we need at the right times? How do we release these ephemeral environments so that we're not draining the planet as often as we would be with all of these standing application environments? There are things you can do that can reduce the environmental impact if you just pre-plan them into these transformation programs.
Yeah, a lot of developers are really good at consuming resources, but they don't often think about releasing resources.
Yeah, I hear all the time about people spinning up these cloud environments and then just kind of letting them go. They never end them, and you can't imagine. I guess you can imagine, but there's so much money that's wasted every single year on unnecessary cloud spend, and people don't even think about the impact that they have on the environment as well when they do things like that. So I think there's definitely a lot to consider when we're talking about sustainability from all ends of the spectrum. And, Jed, when you mentioned DevSecOps, I'm thinking we're just going to add something else onto there. It's going to be DevSec, Sustain Ops, and, it's just going to keep going on and on. But I think anything that an organization can do to raise awareness in sustainability and how they and their employees can, reduce their carbon footprint, increase their sustainability efforts, and really go, is it, what is the term you just used it, Jed? Is it carbon neutral? There it is. Would be certainly a benefit to the organizations and obviously the planet as well. So when you guys were talking all together, you mentioned that each of you have kind of your own individual programs. I imagine there was a whole lot of learning that went on between the different organizations as you guys kind of consolidated your efforts or combine your efforts. So what were some of the things that kind of came out in the conversations that you guys were having initially when it came to just having the conversation about sustainability? I mean, were there certain things that came to light that maybe you guys hadn't thought about?
Yeah, definitely for all three pillars of sustainability, environmental, society, and governance, there's a lot that can be learned across all these different organizations. On the governance side, for instance, companies today, all public companies have to report their financials, their standards and metrics around that, but nobody's forced to report their sustainability metrics. Mm-hmm. But what if we could define the right metrics for E, S, and G, environmental, society, and governance, that all companies began reporting? That's a way to really mobilize the world's biggest companies to make a difference. And those are the kinds of ideas that came up during our discussion.
Interesting.
Well, and I think you sometimes worry about things like global warming and so on become a bit of a political topic, or it becomes polarizing on that level. What was really refreshing to me is how many people, regardless of industry or geography or political persuasion, were fundamentally aligned around the idea of being more effective, more transparent, and more sustainable in the way we work on all levels. So it was refreshing to find objective people trying to solve problems versus getting wrapped up in discussions about carbon offsets and things like that.
That's great. That's great, and I hope that the conversations continue, and that we really are able to make a difference in just not just the way IT impacts the environment, but really the way that we kind of consider sustainability writ large, just even beyond IT. So I think you guys are on the right track, and I think it's a great endeavor. If folks want to get involved, either on a corporate or an individual level, are you accepting new members, or how are you actually, how is the group organized currently?
We're absolutely accepting new members and actively recruiting to have people join the cause.
Yeah, and people can reach out to either Jed or I, or connect to the sustainability.it.org website and drop us a note there.
Excellent. Well, Jed and Ralph, thank you both for coming on Techstrong TV and telling us about it. I think it's a great endeavor. And I invite both of you back to come maybe 6 months or a year from now. Let me know how things are going.
Yeah, we'd love to. Thank you, Charlene.
All right, great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the webinars preview. I always tell you, we have so many webinars, great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. I got 3 here for you that I hope you'll be able to join us. So please do mark your calendar. The first one is called Using DevSecOps for Continuous Compliance and Security Automation. This one is happening Tuesday, April 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is sponsored by OpsMX. Compliance and security practices often depend on manual, outdated methods that impede software delivery performance. Compliance breaches that occur late in the software delivery pipeline result in costly mistakes that are difficult to correct. In this webinar, they're going to discuss how leading companies are automating security and compliance within their continuous delivery pipelines, resulting in faster discovery, detection, and remediation of security violations and vulnerabilities. It's going to be a good one. All right, the second one is called 2022 Container Security Trends Live Expert Panel Live Stream. This one is happening Wednesday, April 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Snyk. The cloud is where applications run today, but the cloud itself is software managed and run with code, such as infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, and Helm configs and Docker files. Securing your cloud can and should follow much the same model as the security of the apps you're running in the cloud. So in this webinar, Techstrong research analysts will share some new research on securing cloud environments, containers, and the need for greater visibility and collaboration between engineers, operations, and security teams. In addition, a subject matter expert from Snyk will discuss challenges and successes observed from teams applying developer-first security principles to their cloud-native infrastructures. The third and final webinar I want to let you know about today is called Building High-Performing DevOps Teams. This one is happening Wednesday, April 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This is one of our DevOps Unbound panel discussions sponsored by Tricentis. And to improve software delivery performance, the first thing organizations need to do is improve their DevOps team's expertise. DevOps doesn't deliver code by itself. It takes a great team to do it. So how then can we help our DevOps teams become high performers and foster innovation? What makes an effective DevOps team? What does the future hold for DevOps engineers? This panel of experts will discuss this, the role of DevOps, the demand for DevOps engineers, and the main principles and practices that DevOps teams should apply to achieve high performance. Another good one there. Definitely want to check that one out. All right, that's it for the webinar's preview. I'll be back on Monday with a brand new batch for you. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day, great weekend, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got Mitch Ashley. He is speaking with Den Jones, who is the Chief Security Officer at Banyan Security. They discuss Zero Trust Network Security, its adoption, and some strategies for leveraging existing investments in an organization's Zero Trust platform. Good stuff there. Den actually held positions over at Cisco and Adobe. He was a practitioner over there, and so he brings a lot of that experience into Banyan Security, and it is a great perspective on Zero Trust Network Security. So let's roll a conversation now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Den Jones. Den is Chief Security Officer with Banyan Security. Good to be with you, Ben. Sorry, Dan.
Hey,
sorry.
Hey, Mitch, you can call me anything. I've been called worse. So okay. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Fairly wealth of experience in the industry, some pretty well-known companies. So I'm excited to talk with you about this. Would you first just start out, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then a little bit about Banyan Security, what you all do?
Yeah, so Banyan Security, I just joined in December. And prior to that, I worked at Cisco. I was running the enterprise security organization there within the CIO's IT organization. And then prior to that, I was running the same sort of organization in Adobe. I ran enterprise security in Adobe for a number of years, reporting to the CSO in Adobe. And in both cases, identity was at the forefront of what our organizations delivered for the company. In Adobe, it was the workforce identity, whereas in Cisco, it was also the workforce as well as our customer identity stack. And then there was many of the other things that surround identity within the enterprise security organization. And then when I joined Banyan, this is the first time I'd say I've moved to the dark side, going from a practitioner to a practitioner stroke someone who works for a vendor. So I run security and IT within Banyan, as well as our Customer Zero program. And then a bunch of my time is things like this. I want to be an evangelist in the industry, sharing what I've learned over the years. And especially in the case of Zero Trust, my organization, we deployed Zero Trust at both Adobe and Cisco.
Excellent. Well, let's dive into that. I sometimes I ask myself, are we still in the phase of defining what Zero Trust means? I remember we're not really sure, so each organization will kind of define it for themselves, maybe working with their vendors and partners to do that. Are we still kind of focusing the lens, or have we pretty well put a boundary or an understanding about what Zero Trust means and what we have to do?
I think a lot of organizations are still struggling. I mean, we have NIST and a lot of organizations like that have done really, really well at creating documents that explain their view of Zero Trust. And I think the problem is you've got so many vendors that claim to be Zero Trust vendors, and that really confuses the mix. Banyan Security, the first thing is, we're not Banyan Vines, right? We're a different company with a small startup, and we really focus on remote access. And we'll call that Zero Trust. But, some people just call that, hey, that's remote access, but with some other fancy things as it integrates with the identity, right? And I think what people have done is they've taken identity and access management, and if they're doing fine-grained authorization, they might claim to be a Zero Trust vendor. If they just done VPN, or not just, but if they done VPN, maybe they'll say they're a Zero Trust vendor. So I think the reality is kind of like the term digital transformation or XDR, Zero Trust falls in that bucket. Everyone gets told, hey, we want some Zero Trust because they read it in the magazine, right? Do some Zero Trust. And they've lost sight of what's the business value, what's the business benefit, and what's the business outcome. So, when I talk to people about it, I didn't try during my time at Adobe and Cisco to tell people about Zero Trust and throw that down their throat. What I wanted to do was say, hey, we have business problems to solve. We have bad people trying to attack us. We have a workforce that's trying to do their job. And we've got a security team that's always continually trying to raise the bar. Mm-hmm. How do you take those three things and deliver outcomes? And yeah, the marketing term, people will call it Zero Trust, but the reality is it's all about outcomes in a business.
It's interesting. We think of security as something we do, not as a value to the business, right? Because it's a necessary function that we perform. I think one of the reasons why run this by you, I think one of the reasons why we struggle with the definition, what does it mean, Zero Trust, is it's like a infinitely more complex version of we're going to go from bastion hosts to firewalls to, inside is protected, outside's not, or secure. It's an evolutionary change in strategy and thinking about then how we apply the tools and processes and information and analysis that we perform on it. You kind of think of it this way. If I trusted everybody and I went and looked at all the data, I'd assume a lot of things. If I didn't trust anybody or anything, that would cause me to ask a lot more questions and make sure I know what I'm seeing and understanding, or am I? Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, so is it a strategy? Is it an architecture? Is it all of the above? So could be. Yeah, I think so. But I do get down to there's a maturity level, a maturity curve on any implementation or any strategy. And the reality is if I just start off with, we've got an authentication workflow and I want to inject some posture check of a device, I might want to do that. And now I might want to have more intelligence about the data that they're getting to, that the applications are accessing. And if I want to get another step, maybe I'm doing packet analysis and I want to get really deep inside there. The fundamental thing for me is workers are traveling more and more. They're, especially after COVID, they're not in the office as much. So they're not on your corporate network as much unless you want to put something in the middle that chokes all the traffic. And you may or may not want to do that. For me, that's the whole thing of, how they always said that video killed the radio star. Well, I'm almost like this choke point will kill the Zoom video star, because the reality is at some point it becomes over congested. You've got bandwidth and you've got all these issues. So always being in line on the traffic for me is not a good thing. But the applications more and more are not inside your network. So the reality is that choke point coming in my VPN to go back out, or being a CASB or something in the middle, I don't think that's a good path for us to go down for all traffic. So that makes packet analysis even harder and more expensive. So I kind of look at it like you may want to do that for some stuff and you may choose not to. So there's a maturity curve and there's an investment. The more you're doing these kind of things, the more money you're going to spend.
There's a transformation happening in software from just focusing on reliability and shifting to think of resiliency. We need resilient software. If things are going to fail, things are going to happen, just like in the security world. Breaches are going to happen. Doesn't matter how much money you want to spend unless you shut it all off and go home. It's going to happen. So that changes your attitude about, well, then we have to have not just a response program for an incident. We have to have an active process that we use and follow. And it seems like this is kind of the same way with zero trust is, let's either re-examine how we're kind of architected our strategy or our technology and our processes. Or maybe you take the things that you assumed that were assumptions about how the world in the world of security works today, and let's assume those things aren't there anymore, right? It's kind of like, I might need a fax machine if all the email goes down and I've got to send a document. Who would have thought I'd still need one? But maybe I do. It's that sort of mental shift in what you're saying about if you want it all going through one choke point, sounds an awful lot like the old Bastion host days, right?
Yep. Yeah, and this is so. Fortunately, I think the way the world's working is, everyone still has their VPN environment and they still have that available to them. When we were looking at deploying our Zero Trust platforms in Adobe and Cisco, the one thing I used to say to people is, look, we're not trying to replace the VPN. Now, there might be use cases in the future where you still want a VPN, but the reality is what we will do is we'll deploy this new platform, which is, in essence, if you're coming internal for apps internal, a reverse proxy. So the good thing is when you're doing these projects, you have the ability to do that project and you've got this fallback of, well, if that doesn't work, we've still got the VPN. So the reality is I could go to 40,000 users and say, hey, you're going to use this platform, so you'll not VPN in, your authentication will be simpler, and that will be really good for you. If all things go to crap, then, hey, the VPN's still there. Until a point in time where you know that this new platform is baked in, robust, and then people just aren't using the VPN, and then you can scale it back. We were really fortunate in Adobe because we done that just before COVID. We deployed this platform 2018, 2019, it was robust. By the end of 2019, as COVID started to kind of hit the world, we'd already got this platform up and running that was scalable, that meant people were accessing internal apps and services without VPN already. So when it came to say, let's all work from home tomorrow, everyone could do that. They didn't bat an eyelid. It was really, that was pretty cool.
I don't know if it was intentional. Maybe it wasn't in some cases, but that moving away from it's all centralized, it's all handled through a VPN. It's all kind of, we control it all because we know where it's going to be. Sort of by accident built in this whole distributed model for us where we're not dependent upon a single checkpoint, a choke point, or a single thing that's going to stop, and control what's happening. It takes a different philosophy. I'm curious, when you say a zero trust platform, a lot of things that could mean. What does that mean to you? What are the elements of having a zero trust platform?
Yeah, and I'll start with some context of zero trust in this sense for what we were deploying there was really about users accessing applications and services. Some people will talk about workload to workload or even workplace, and they'll talk about NAC and things of that nature. Well, we were talking about users getting to apps and services. The reason we focus there is because that is a visible business improving change. Users getting to stuff easier and quicker saves the business money. Us eliminating things like passwords and using certificates instead saves us operational costs and improves security. And then VPN, everybody hates logging into their VPN system. And once you're in there, you often full-time employees get full access to the network. So what happens is our zero trust platform was a couple of things. It was an integration with our IDP. In that case, we were using Okta as the IDP. During that integration, we'll do a posture check on the device. If you pass the posture check, you then get allowed to access the application and service. If the app and service is internal, you're coming through our reverse proxies where we're doing some more security controls, but we're only allowing you access to that application. You're not getting any other port or protocol or access to any other system. So when you connect to the application, you can't suddenly sniff around the network. If I was going to do the same thing in the VPN, I'm able to sniff around the network and look for vulnerable things on your network. So for us, it was really cool. So the platform is really a set of existing investments that we already had, really glued together. So when you think about when we were doing this, we spent $240,000 and increased our staff by one person to get our zero trust environment off the ground. And that was a 7-month project. So when you kind of think of that return on investment and the quick change for 40,000 people to no longer use username and password, see the second factor less, and not use VPN. We also built security intelligence. So we were looking for anomalous events on passwords and authentication. And that made us remove the need to change passwords every 90 days. And that then changed our service desk tickets, a reduction of about 60 to 80% on tickets related to password change. So while we'll sit and say, hey, we've done some zero trust, no, what we really done was we improved access to apps and services, we improved security, and we saved money. And when you can tell a CIO that or a CSO that, it's like, and those are usually two different conversations, right? The pressures a CIO is under is entirely different than the pressures a CSO is under. So I could say to the CSO, would you like to prevent lateral movement on your network? It's like, of course I would. Okay, well, this is how we do it. And then you go to the CIO and you're saying, hey, would you like to improve the experience for 40,000 people and not have them log into VPN? It's like, of course, yeah. So, sign me up. So you kind of realize the conversations are different, the emotions are different for these people, the complaints and the frustration in your workforce is different. And when you know all those things, what you're really doing is you're creating a situation and a project where you're going to play into those. Now, at the end, the marketing people will call that some zero trust. We just called it, let's get some shit done. Let's go. Let's make some magic happen. And at the very start of that project, I can tell you, I had people in my own organization fighting against it.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And by the end of it, they're like, holy crap, they pulled it off.
there's the what do you mean we're not going to have passwords? We can't do this without passwords, right? That conversation. Yep. Well, yes.
Oh, we had security purists that were like, I can't believe you're not going to use the VPN.
You know what? I had a change of CEOs in one company, and the new CEO happened to have had a technical background at one point. And one of the things he first said to me is, whatever we do, I'm not going to use your VPN. I said, good, because now I can get rid of it. So we're done.
That's awesome. Like,
not totally, but it was like that helped us with that shift of philosophy.
Yeah. And we were really fortunate in Adobe because in the early 2000s, Adobe were changing from a shrink-wrapped company to a cloud company. And as part of that, our IT organization, everything was cloud first. So our CIO mandated any solution you're really bringing in, you've got to look at it being cloud first. And if it's not cloud first, you got to explain why. And you kind of had to go through that. And what that really meant was we weren't building internally as much. We were certainly building or subscribing to more services, things like Workday and, these cloud-based services. And that really changes that dynamic of, do you have to come in our network to go back out? And when you really think about it, all you're trying to do is secure the traffic. You're just trying to protect the data. That's all we're trying to do. So it was a really great time to be part of what I would think of as, a visionary company doing some marvelous stuff and being enabled to kind of get on that bandwagon. I mean, that was really fun.
I had a business model change and said to my team, any capital you thought we have, we no longer have access to. We're much more of a cash business. Go forward, we're moving to the cloud, right? And it helped. That's why this is cloud first strategy is happening. Well, Dan, this has been fantastic. Really enjoyed talking to you, and your wisdom from your experiences shines through in a really positive and helpful way. And you have a nice complimentary, easy delivery of that, so you don't sound like a puffy CISO or whatever. So compliments to you.
Thanks, Mitch.
You bet. Dan Jones, tell us a little bit about where we can get more information about Banyan Security.
So Banyan, we are banyansecurity.io. And actually, the one cool thing is we actually have a version of our software where you can download it, you can access it, you can set it up yourself. So it's an entry tier, a free version if you're a small team, so you can at least play with it and get to use it. So I encourage you to hunt that out on our website. If like me, you grew up being chased and hounded by salespeople and you don't enjoy that, then that's a great way to get started.
Call that DevRel in the software, right? Developer relations. Maybe we need security rel.
Maybe.
Dan, thanks again for joining us. Please check out banyansecurity.io.
Thanks, Mitch. Take it easy, everyone.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, we are back. Rounding out today's Techstrong TV broadcast, we have The View with Vizard. In this one, Mike Vizard is speaking with Federico Kunze-Kulmer, who is the co-founder of a company called Evmoz. And they explain how smart contracts and blockchain platforms can be used to compensate open source contributors and maintainers. Open source contributors and maintainers do a lot of work for no money whatsoever, so it's high time we considered compensating compensating them for their time and their efforts and certainly their expertise. And hopefully smart contracts and blockchain platforms can help us do that. But it's a great conversation. Hope you'll join us for it. We're going to go ahead and roll it right now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're talking with Federico Kunz-Kolmar, who is CEO of a company called Evmos. They're working on smart contracts that sit on top of blockchain platforms, and they're part of that whole Web3 movement. Federico, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me today.
There's a lot of conversations these days about how best to go compensate people for contributing to open source projects. There's a lot of concerns and frustrations up and down the line. Is there some way to go after this using blockchain and smart contracts that would allow us to maybe compensate these folks for their time and effort?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really important question that I'm asking myself for the past few years as an open source contributor. I think the main question is also like, how do we support that single developer that is maintaining with a side project, like millions or thousands of projects that are already deployed in production? Like maybe he's like side project or side hustle that he has had some interest in building some cool tooling or cool application, and that is now supporting like all these. It's now seen as critical infrastructure. And traditionally, or what we see nowadays, for example, with GitHub sponsors, is that some of these other applications that are using this upstream dependency are like, so some of them are like subscribing to these like developer and like, I don't know, paying them, I don't know, a few hundred per month, and you have like different tiers. But then, for example, with Web3 and blockchain, you have like a different mechanism for also funding like upstream dependencies of your project. Like, for example, Go Ethereum or Tendermint, like or some of the projects that we are major infrastructure projects that we're using as an upstream dependency. Through like tokens that are newly generated on every block, through the validation of the transactions. So like all the tokens that are generated by the minings, validating and securing the network. You can also allocate a percentage of these to the developers that are the core team of that specific project, but you can also allocate some to say decentralized autonomous organization, or DAO for short, or talk directly to the upstream team or the upstream company, and allocate some of those tokens to a wallet that they hold. So there are different mechanisms here, and it's important to understand that there are like mechanisms that are more like decentralized. Some of them are maybe managed by these decentralized organizations. So there are different ways of going with a potential solution here to support these developers.
A lot of people have it in their head that many of these developers are working for large companies somewhere, so they're getting paid a salary by some, multi-billion-dollar company, when in fact, they aren't. Just a lot of folks who are teams of 3 and 4 who just got together in their spare time, and then suddenly they're being asked to maintain all the security updates and patches for enterprises. And then it turns out that they don't have the time for that. Nobody's compensating them for that behavior. So where does the funding come from? I get that you're the mechanism or a platform that can be used to drive the delivery of the funding, but where do you think that funding should come from?
Yeah, so traditionally, the way to go has been like for these developers to de-risk by keeping their job at their like full-time job, and then like starting this side hustle. And then some of them start getting all these, like, for example, GitHub sponsorships and all that. So that has the traditional way of receiving funding. But nowadays, if they're maintaining also critical infrastructure for all these Web3 ecosystem projects, blockchain, or other decentralized applications in blockchain technology, some of them are started to integrate like more long-tail sustainability program for these developers, so that based on the For example, on the utilization of these applications, they can scale the funding that they provide to these other teams. So like, for example, one way that we're doing it at Evmos is allocating 50% of the transaction fee. So like you, with every transaction, you pay a fee that was traditionally going only to validators that were secure or miners that were securing the network. And we're instead allocating 50% of those fees from the transactions to developers that are building on our platform. So either can be, going back to your question, it can be either like a one-off grant from a foundation or one of these Web3 projects or applications to these single developer or group of developers that is maintaining this critical piece of infrastructure, or it can be a long-term sustainable mechanism like the one that we're trying to introduce that scales with the utilization of the project. So it's an interesting mechanism that can benefit a lot of developers jumping into open source and like trying to like solve the strategy of the commons issue.
Mm-hmm. How hard would it be to set this up? Because a lot of these projects are maintainers who are themselves kind of pressed for time. So what's the mechanism or best way to go about creating this whole infrastructure for them to get paid or at least compensate some of the contributors?
Yeah, with blockchain technology and decentralized application in general, it's super easy just to set up a wallet. It can be a hosted wallet through an exchange, or it could be like a personal wallet, a hardware wallet that it's not connected to the internet. And you can allocate certain percentage of these rewards allocated to these developers on a block-to-block basis. So you set up the address, and some percentage of those tokens are directly funding this specific wallet. Or alternatively, you have the infrastructure through a grant program, like a proper grant program where they apply, and there's like a peer review by different members of the community, and they evaluate like the different milestones that they've provided. And finally, you have some sort of like, which is more like a decentralized approach, where like some like a decentralized autonomous organization where a group of people create this like organization that lives on the blockchain, and they have a bunch of funding. And then through governance mechanism, they vote on who to allocate tokens or who to distribute these tokens for funding. And so they distribute all this funding to the wallets that I mentioned previously that are owned by these developers. So it's a really interesting mechanism that you can play around with all these different mechanisms, these different levels of decentralization, different ways to engage with the community itself, or go to a more traditional like grants program where you have like different reviewers, but it's not like open source or like fully transparent as sometimes you would see with these like decentralized autonomous organization and voting mechanisms that are pioneered by the community.
So why is a decentralized approach driven around these smart contracts per se going to be a better solution at the end of the day compared to the centralized approach that we have in place today, whether it's PayPal or something else that people are using to compensate folks?
I think the reason right now is sometimes you're struggling to find like the ones that are actually willing to pay. Like finding subscribers and GitHub sponsors sometimes is really hard when you're getting started. And like through these other approach that we're introducing, for example, like the fee mechanism where you split 50% to the developer itself and 50% to the validators that secure the network, the more your application gets utilized by the network, the more fees you're getting, because it's directly proportional to the utilization of these these applications developed by these developers. So yeah, I think that's like in terms of scaling, in terms of finding the users, and I mean, it's directly proportional to the popularity of the application and the utilization, I think, than a more traditional approach that goes through, for example, PayPal, and people need to be willing to like go through GitHub sponsors and pay and subscribe.
What do you think is the current state of Web3 then right now? It seems like there's a lot of interest, but there's a lot of skepticism. So which part of Web3 in your mind is what people should be focused on? And just how big a trend will this be?
I think there's going to be a big trend in terms of right now. I think we're still in the early phases of building the core infrastructure. So you see a lot of applications that are more traditionally creating like decentralized financial applications on top of these different layers of infrastructure that support blockchains and distributed ledger technologies. But I think now, as the infrastructure is maturing, we're going to start seeing all these different governance mechanisms, and people are going to start innovating with different economic models that can be tested for the first time live. Previously, like different economic models either were like studied like case by case, so like assuming different things on the like studying on the past cases like Venezuela, or like different mechanisms using like different inflation ratios and all that. But now for the first time, you're able to test something that is live, used by thousands of users, and you're able to more like play around with different inflation mechanisms and different incentive mechanisms for all your users. And then you're able to generate different applications that are also targeting, for example, how to create more like integration for governance, and all these trend that was last year about like non-fungible tokens, how to represent assets that are intrinsically represented in the real life, like pieces of art, like a rental contract that can be represented as a token on the digital world. And then you could, for example, reuse issue shares for these, for example, rental contract, so that you can start earning more, or like splitting the earnings from these like rental contract or these piece of art that you can like, for example, lend to like a museum or something like that. So there are like different applications that are starting to be created that are more on the financial side for now. But I think we're going to start seeing, as I mentioned before, a lot of different mechanisms to test different scenarios for economic and governance mechanisms too.
So what's your best advice to folks about how to get started down this path? Because I think sometimes people hear about blockchain platforms and smart contracts and the whole 9 yards, and they get a little intimidated and they kind of sit there and see what everybody else is going to do first.
Yeah. Are you asking me in terms of like developing these smart contracts, or more like into like knowing more and doing your own research into how to
a little bit of both would be great.
Yeah. So for developing smart contracts and getting into blockchain development, I think following the different trends on Twitter to like, so that you're up to date, follow like the like specific projects that are trying to innovate in the field. And then they also have like guides and tutorials on different documentations that are available. There's also about a few sort of like influencers in the sense of like how-to guys on how to develop a smart contract. There are like different like VCs and other people that have been founding different projects in the space that are also sharing like more technical content. So like I would highly advise like going on different social media platforms and follow these people on projects. And for getting into cryptocurrencies, I think researching, doing your own research about the different projects, the team behind it, so that you don't fall into different scams. It's really important because there are a lot of a lot of teams that are, for example, are like, there's a legitimate team building something very interesting from a technical point of view, and there might be another one that without any background or a technical background start like, because it's all open source, they copy the same project and rebrand it and put like fancy images and unicorns and whatever, and start selling it as the next big thing, which in reality is very different. And that has happened with, unfortunately, a bunch of products. And that's what we also need to start building some defensibility for all these legitimate projects trying to build something really cool in the technical space, from being like the value of these different projects captured by these like scam projects, I would say. So you need to do your own research into like what is actually going on behind the scenes, and not look at the price necessarily of a token.
Hey, Federico, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike, for having me.
All right. Hey, guys, back to you in the studio, and hopefully there's much more to be learned about Web3, blockchain, smart contracts, open source, put it all together. It's going to be interesting times. Take care.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, that wraps up today's Techstrong TV broadcast. Hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed bringing it to you, as always. I'll be back on Monday with a brand new broadcast. Until then, I hope everybody has a great weekend. And please, whatever you do, stay safe.